I put the video on YouTube and I write show notes on my blog and stuff.
Okay.
Recently, I'm a part of a company called Copyblogger, and we
Mhm.
send out like a pretty big weekly newsletter. And so it's like a really written word type brand. We do a lot of like written content marketing, but so many
Mhm.
people these days are just comfortable with audio that I started
Yeah.
kind of incorporating my personal podcast into Copyblogger.
Yeah.
So I mean, it works. People like it. I'm like okay in interviews, like nobody's told me that I suck yet.
No,
So
I think you're
I think
good.
it'll work. Great. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Great.
And my audio is okay, right? Like everything's
Oh yeah. Well, you got the
fine. Okay.
AirPods, so they like work really well.
I have AirPods and I have this mic here.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So
So
you're good to
AirPods are
go.
for so I can hear you, and then I have the mic. So I just want to make sure the audio sounds all right.
Yeah, you sound good. I guess
Cool.
like the one thing when people actually have mics is when they get away from it, they don't
Mhm.
realize it. So like, just try to stay.
Just stay here.
Yeah, just stay where you're at.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Shit. Well, let's rock and roll. Thank you for joining me very much. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. You and I spoke a little bit before we started recording about how we're both writers and how I'm always excited to talk to writers, just because I feel like writers still till this day are the best communicators, right? Because when you write something, you have to really, really think about how it is that you're presenting what it is that you want to say. So, with that, I'm really excited to talk to you. Before we dive into that, though, I always like to make sure that my audience has a chance to get to know my guests. So, please just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and who you are.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Tim. Yeah, so my name's Amanda. I grew up in LA. I lived in LA for most of my life. And then I moved to San Francisco about 7 or 8 years ago, mainly to work in tech. I was there for quite a while. And, I really started to think about where I wanted to live differently when my husband and I had our son. And then more so when the pandemic hit. I think a big part of me actually thought we would never move back to LA. And, LA is where all of our family is. Um, but, once we had our kid, I started to realize, like I really wanted to see my family more often, have them be able to build more of a relationship with my son. And then also, when the pandemic hit and we were just stuck at home all day, we really thought, we need to love where we live. I mean, you know, you want to live in a place, that's safe, where you feel comfortable, um, where if you're working from home, where you have the kind of setup that you need to do your work well. So we put a lot of thought into how we wanted to live. And it ended up just working out where it made sense for us to move back down to LA. So I mean, I've been happy with the move, but I mean, but where I'm happy is also just the pandemic actually gave us the opportunity to be very mindful about where we wanted to live and how we wanted to live. So this wasn't just oh, I want to be close to family, let's move here. That was part of that, but it became much more than that. It became, um, what is the kind of space that we need? How do we want our son to live? How can we set ourselves up for success to do our jobs well? So yeah, so that all kind of went into the move, and it was kind of a strange moving experience, but it worked out.
If you're willing, I'm a little fascinated with San Francisco. I've been to San Francisco once. I've never by any means participated in like the Silicon Valley tech hub. And as an East Coaster, as an outsider, I can speak for myself, but I do get the feeling that a lot of times from the outside looking in, it feels like it's this magical place where like all of this special stuff is happening. But then in a lot of instances, when I speak to people who have either lived there or moved away from there is that feeling where you know that you could be either participating in some kind of upstart that could change the world, but there's also like this constant fight because the chances of whatever tech company you're working for actually blowing up are pretty slim, right? And then
Mhm.
you also have to maintain the lifestyle that is San Francisco, which is just really, really expensive. So this is a deviation. I didn't plan to go down this road by any means, but I'm
Yeah.
curious as to what that experience is like. I mean, is it really this like magical place that it seems like in all of the TV shows, or is it like a grind of a city just like every other place?
You know, in my experience, it's both.
Yeah.
I mean, where it's kind of a magical place is, I mean, there are so many possibilities, and so many people move to San Francisco or to the Bay Area to work at a cool startup, or to try or to pursue that career in tech. So you have a lot of people who are moving to this city who are looking to meet other people and make new friends. So it is really cool that it is easy to meet people because there are so many people who are willing to meet up,
Mm,
and because it's a small area, so it's easy to walk to this neighborhood, take a bus to that neighborhood, and so on. And then this might sound kind of weird, but I think part of what contributes to that sort of magical feeling is that the weather never really changes.
yeah.
So it's sort of like you're just in this bubble that everything is the same all the time. The weather's always like high 60s, which is great for walking, because that way you don't get too hot. Um, so there's that, and then it also is a grind. I mean, I am very fortunate to have had the experience of working at a couple of really small startups, but also one startup that kind of blew up. I worked at Fitbit for several years, so
Cool.
I really got to experience that kind of grind, and how special it is to be at a company that does kind of blow up. So the grind is, it's like, um, you become very aware of what you have and what you don't have.
Yeah.
And it does kind of feel like this rat race where, you always know someone else who got super rich from an IPO, or their company got acquired, and all those things. And you kind of think, oh man, when is that going to happen to me? Or will that happen to me? Or, oh, I bet that person's making so much more than me. But then it's also a city with a terrible homelessness problem. So you also become super aware of, oh, okay, I also have so much more than this other person. Or maybe you feel like you have so much more than the people who don't work in tech. So it's just kind of this strange city where there is so much magic to it, but you also just become hyper aware of the rat race and of
Yeah.
the haves and have nots.
Very insightful, and I appreciate you being honest about that. I'm self-aware enough to see that all the
Hmm.
places that I've been to for the first time, we have this idea about them. You get there and you think it's just another place, and every city has their own personality. But I've just heard such dichotomies about the city with the one side or the other, and so hearing that
Hmm.
insight from you is really cool. Thank you. Okay, so now you're the head of marketing for Growth Machine. I had Nat on my podcast, I guess about a year ago. He and I still talk on Twitter from time to time. He's like one of those super smart guys where every time he talks, I pay attention just because he's kind of like weirdly smart in that way.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about Growth Machine. I want to talk about your role there. But how did you end up there in the first place? Like, Growth Machine is a marketing agency which stands out, which is difficult to do. There's a million marketing agencies. And so the fact that you were able to get a head of marketing position, which is like pretty coveted in this transition, I want to learn how you fell into that role and what your work looks like.
Yeah. So I started following Nat and Growth Machine sometime last year. I think I first heard of them through the podcast series they did about Cup and Leaf and how they grew the site from zero to over 100,000 monthly visitors. Um, and then from there, I got to, what I thought was so interesting about that was, at the time, I thought, I just kind of assumed, everything that could be SEO'd has been SEO'd.
Yeah.
Like, all this has been done. So I was really fascinated by this idea that, and I think they thought it too when they started the T blog. Um, but they realized, oh, there actually is a lot of possibility here. And then obviously they grew the site. And then since then, I just kind of kept up with what they were doing. And then I subscribed to Nat's newsletter, the Monday Medley, sometime last year. And so when I saw that they were hiring for a head of content, I thought, oh, wait, I could do this. I write, I have done content and marketing for a number of years. Um, so I ended up applying. And as we, started talking about the role, um, I did a project. I submitted a project and like kind of plan for what content might look like. But I also kind of turned that conversation into, well, here's what marketing might look like. And as we talked more and more, it just kind of made sense to turn this into a kind of head of marketing role, which, it is very content focused.
Hmm.
But now I'm also focused on other things like, making sure our email funnels are optimized, making sure um, lead generation has been optimized, and then just also thinking about what can we do with content in a way that puts our best foot forward in terms of marketing. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, talk to me about that. You're a fantastic writer, by the way, and I really mean that. I spent the last couple of days reading a lot of your work on Growth Machine and one article on your personal blog as well. Little side note: this is the second time this week that somebody told me about Estonia and how like remarkable of a country it is, and so I feel like I have to go there.
Yeah.
Like I said, side note, but there's definitely people that think why bother with SEO? There's like a million new pages of content published a day. What are the opportunities? And so from your viewpoint, what is it that you guys are actually doing on the Growth Machine blog, but also with your clients that does provide these results that you guys seem to continuously provide?
Yeah. So this is also, what really attracted me to this to Growth Machine as a company. I mean, if you told me 5 years ago that I would be working at a content marketing agency, I would, it's something that it just never really occurred to me is all. So, I was kind of surprised to have gone down this path. But, what really stood out to me about Growth Machine is, I mean, at the end of the day, we're just really transparent about what we do, what we don't do. We're not one of those agencies that will just do it all for you. We're very upfront about, we do content creation, SEO, and link building. Like that's what our business is. Um, and then we're also just really transparent about our processes and how we track success of what we do. We don't say anything like, oh, we have proprietary metrics and don't worry about it,
Hmm.
this is how we know things are ranking. Like, when we work with our clients, we give them a Google Data Studio dashboard. We use Ahrefs, we use Grammarly, and we're just really upfront about all that stuff. um, and then there's also just the way we manage clients. When we work with our clients, we really see ourselves as part of their team, but the part of their team that creates content for them. And we develop good relationships with our clients. A lot of them are really nice people. And then, and if we feel like we can't work with you, like if we feel like we're not a good fit for whatever reason it might be, maybe it's a chemistry fit, maybe it's maybe we feel like we don't have the expertise in something, we're upfront about that. We'll say, hey, this might not be the best fit, because it is really important for us that we work with clients where we feel comfortable that we'll have a good relationship and that we can set them up for success.
Is this the work that you used to do in San Francisco? Was it mostly like product based companies or
It was
SaaS,
a
like
lot of
software companies?
It was a couple of different kinds of companies. So I worked at NatureBox many years ago, and that's a direct-to-consumer snack company.
Mm-hmm.
So there, I think I was employee number 17 or so. So I was hired to do content marketing, but I did social media, I did product marketing, PR. So it was kind of a marketing generalist role, which was a lot of fun. And then when I joined Fitbit a couple years later, I was one of the early hires on their B2B marketing team. So I headed up content there. And B2B marketing at Fitbit was partly it was devices, selling the actual Fitbit devices, but it was also SaaS, so software that we sold to help other companies run corporate wellness programs for their employees.
Yeah, very cool. So the reason I'm asking, is this the first time that you've been involved with more of a client services type industry? I'm always fascinated by this because
Yeah.
I can't even remember where I saw this. Maybe it was one of the blog posts on Growth Machine, but for somebody in Nat's position who has a really strong personal brand, I'm sure there's been instances where he said to himself, like, what am I going to start a service business for and deal with clients when I could probably leverage the traffic that I have to grow some kind of software product and not have to deal directly with these client relationships. And I've had an agency for 10 years. We're in a similar position where we've stuck around and um, we've facilitated a real particular niche which we've thrived in. But I can relate to that idea in my head where it's like, do I want to go this way and deal with clients and deal with emails and answering inquiries all the time, or can I kind of take this leverage route of creating a product? So from your viewpoint, you've been on both sides, right? You've done the NatureBox direct to consumer, you've done the FitBit, which is a product and a SaaS model. So what's it like being on the other side with the client services?
So I would say this role is kind of similar to my role at Fitbit in the sense that, it is B2B. And I'm not really client facing in this role or at Fitbit, but I will sometimes talk to clients, or like if we're doing a case study, if I'm learning more about their business needs. So there's that, but I do feel pretty dialed in, to what our clients are thinking about. And then, when I was at Fitbit, when I did a lot of work on the case studies there. So a big part of the role there was building strong relationships with our clients. And some of what I did kind of ended up being the foundation of their customer marketing program, which sort of just came from getting to know our clients really well, like the people who work on their, essentially the HR and benefits people who are working with day to day, working really closely with them on their needs, um, and we know what they were looking for in terms of a product or software. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. I'm just always interested in that choice because there's pros and cons to
Yeah,
both sides. And a lot of people that
yeah,
listen to this podcast are looking for that idea. They're
yeah,
looking for that direction that they can go. And the one thing that I always say about service businesses is there's not a big barrier to entry. As soon as
yeah.
you get your first client, you're basically a business. And with product companies, there's so much upfront cost and there's so much more risk, but like the
Mhm.
potential upside to it is a lot greater. So those conversations I always find really fascinating as to like the different options that people can come up with and the decisions that they take in that direction.
Yeah, but I do think, what's good about being in a, service oriented company is you get to meet so many people.
Mm,
And when you get to meet people, you can find new opportunities. So maybe you'll be able to, um as you continue to get to know your clients and prospects and such, maybe you eventually learn, oh, maybe we should create this product or this new service because this is what people are looking for. Maybe you end up building some side projects, or maybe eventually that even gives way to a different kind of product that you want to create. So I feel like, you know I will say, like, earlier I said I never expected to work at an agency. I would also say agency life is something that I think I always kind of glorified, at least in my mind. I know that it can be a grind, especially if you're working on a bunch of different accounts, and maybe if you're working at a really big agency. But the thing that I've always liked about it is, or maybe glorified, is the opportunity there is, and getting to meet so many people and getting to understand how different marketing teams or different businesses, like how they manage their work, how they see their customers, how they kind of build customer journeys. I think that's super interesting. And I also just feel like being thrown into situations where you have to just figure it out with a client each time. I just think that kind of forces you into maybe writing better, communicating better, managing meetings better. And so I just kind of feel like, I feel like if you are starting out in marketing or starting out in your career, I think it's a really good idea to start at an agency. I think you'll just get a lot of scrappy experience. And then just being exposed to different types of businesses. I feel like along the way, you'll probably learn faster. Oh, I don't want to be in that kind of industry, or I don't want to work on that kind of business. And I think the sooner you can kind of eliminate things from your list of things you may or may not want to pursue, I think the better off you'll be.
yeah, you mentioned using those experiences to become a better writer. And I think that's a perfect transition to talk about your work as a writer. It's hard to be a good writer. And I really, really mean that, because it's like such a painful process. And there's a lot of writers on the internet. There's only a handful of writers that I can think of off the top of my head where I immediately recognize them and I find myself like on the journey of the story that they're trying to tell. Especially from an SEO agency standpoint, like getting content isn't difficult. There's who knows how many people that can write a blog post for you, but being able to keep someone's attention on a page, and other things like being able to format a piece of content so that it's changing just enough to keep people's attention as they scroll, being able to know where to put bullet points and being able to know where to put headers. It's really an art. Like writing for the internet is an art. And so anytime I see somebody that is, in my view, like gotten close to mastering that skill, I always appreciate it. So uh, how did you grow into your skill as a writer? I imagine that you've practiced a lot, but where did that come from? What was the catalyst for it?
Yeah, I agree. I think writing is so hard, and I'm learning something new every single day, even now. I think I've always it was just kind of innate for me.
Yeah,
I've
me
been
too.
writing for as long as I can remember. Like I think I started writing short stories in kindergarten and in fourth grade, and my early distribution strategy was just sharing them with my teachers. Because I just thought it was fun. And then by middle school, I started my first email newsletter, and it was on AOL. And it was about a fictional band, which is really just a vehicle for me to share silly things I found online. And I just automatically subscribed all my classmates. It was so silly, but I think really the first thing is just doing it, like just write, like just get it out there. um, I think giving yourself a distribution platform, and ideally it's your own, it's your own blog or personal site, or at least your own, Twitter account or something where, um, when I say your own distribution channel, I just mean for a place where you are accountable for what you're saying. Because I think when you think of it that way, when you think of your content like, oh, the things I'm writing I'm going to publish, someone might see it. I think that it raises the stakes a little bit, and it forces you into thinking about your writing differently. Like it's different to write in your personal journal and no one ever sees it ever. But it's different when you're trying to prepare something for other people to potentially see. You start thinking about, oh, is this even accurate? Did I spell this right? Is this interesting? And I think forcing yourself to do that will make you a better writer. Um, and then I also just think it's important to get really comfortable with having people edit you. I think everyone needs an editor. Everyone does. Like not everyone's writing's perfect the first time around. And I think it's really important to be able to be comfortable with someone else reviewing your work and marking it up and saying, this part is boring, I don't like this transition, this sounds awkward. And to just find a way to not take that personally and to just learn from it. Like even now on the Growth Machine blog, right? Two people review my work before it goes out. We have someone on our great editing team who reviews it, and then Nat also reviews it. And I think in each time we edit something, I learn something new. Like, oh, I didn't realize that would sound awkward, or oh, that's true. Like this intro is not very interesting. Um, so yeah, and then also more recently, I started following David Perel on Twitter.
I've
He's
heard a
the
lot
creator of the
about him
Writing
recently.
School.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I did his free course recently, which is really good. Um, I think he just has really good advice on writing in a succinct and clear way. One of my favorite tips from him is, I think it's a recent tweet actually, but it's about starting your story at the part right before you get eaten by the bear.
Mm.
um, it's basically a way to think about your writing so that you cut to the chase a lot faster. And I think about that a lot as I'm writing anything, as I'm writing a blog post, email copy, a tweet. I think about that a lot. I'm like, when do I get eaten by the bear?
You subtly touched on like so many different fears and difficulties of being a writer. I could really go off on a rabbit hole with this, so I'm going to refrain from doing that. But well, there's two of them that I want to talk about. First off, the idea of putting your work in public. This is always a kind of a catch 22 because there's this fine balance behind shipping your work and like being accountable for it and not just constantly publishing bullshit that sucks, like having the courage to say like this is worthy of being published, and also having the courage of saying like this isn't perfect but I'm going to publish it anyway. Right? And it can be
Yeah.
like a real battle in your head because you know that you could always do better, but if you're constantly thinking to yourself this can be better, then you're never going to get anything out there in front of other people. So I've had my own kind of personal battle with this over the years, and I just want to hear about like those emotions that go on with you in that internal battle with you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think about that a lot. I mean, I am someone who's had multiple different kinds of of various blogs. I've had embarrassing diary lands, a MySpace blog at one point. So I do think about that a lot. In terms of thinking about, well, I would say it is just really hard to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
I think people are just, it's natural to be self-conscious or to be afraid that you'll get judged or even just to be afraid of internet trolls. But something that I've come to realize and really remember is just a, people in general. I mean, people don't care about you, like nobody really cares about, I mean, if it's your personal site, I just feel like it's not going to be very likely that you'll find someone who's going to find your personal site and go like, "Ooh, I hate this," and then
Uh-huh.
leave a hateful comment. I'm sure it'll happen. And it happens in general, but I think for the most part, people don't really think that way. So I think there's that. Um, and then I also think, in terms of publishing what you write, so I write a lot, and there's a lot that I don't publish.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll kind of journal. I'll put it in my notes app or a, in a draft in WordPress or something, where I'll start writing something with the idea that I'll publish it online, but then I'll sit with it for a couple days or even a couple weeks, and I'll come back to it. I'll edit, and then sometimes, once I fully write something and get it out of my system, I realize maybe I didn't agree. Yeah, maybe in the end it's like, well, actually, I disagree with my original thought. Or maybe it's just, you know what, this actually isn't even that interesting. I don't need to share it. It's fine. So, sort of, I think my rule of thumb for ultimately publishing, whether it's a tweet or publishing a blog, um, a rule of thumb is sort of, have I been thinking about this topic for more than a couple days? Like, have I been noodling on this for a week, for a month? And if it stands that test of time, where it's a topic that I think that has been interesting, at least to me, for, longer than a couple days, then chances are it's something that I think is worth publishing. And then the other thing too is, just because you publish something on your personal site or so, it doesn't have to mean that you need to broadcast it to your entire social audience like constantly, right? It could just be something that sits there, and that maybe someone will find it valuable or they'll stumble upon it, or maybe you just share it with some close friends. So I think there's that too.
Yeah, very cool. I like how you talked about the idea of giving content like space to breathe and not necessarily publishing. I went through an exercise where I wrote a blog post every single day for a year, and I'm glad that I did it, but
Yeah.
like it was very rewarding, and I definitely think it challenged me as a writer. But in terms of the quality of what I put out there, and also like the quality of the results that I got from it, um there's something to taking your time, putting together content that like really really means something and takes time to absorb, because I think it also like it ups the level of it's difficult to quantify like the value of somebody who reads it, but like I think that there is a way to do that. Like the level of your audience, it also ups that, just because by nature of putting out more higher quality, longer length, like not just for the sake of making it longer, but stuffing more impact in there. The people that read it are just fundamentally going to be more in that tribe. Like they're going to be more willing to take the time to read that content, absorb it, and like hopefully take some kind of an action from it.
Your video
Yeah,
froze.
yeah,
Are
you're
you still
good. You
okay? Oh,
came
there,
back.
we're good. Or my video froze. Yeah, but that's interesting that you talk about your when you were publishing every day. That, I mean, that must have really forced you into thinking about how you're writing, right? Because I'm sure each day you were like, wait, is this interesting? Why am I doing this? Why do I care about this? Why does
Yeah,
the reader care about this?
it was exhausting actually.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay, so but then what do you think about that the differentiation between the type of people that come to read your content? Like, what's the value in putting in that extra time to create real substantial content with meaning and length and impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think about it like, if someone were to ask me personally about something I wrote, what would they say and what would they ask me? Um, how might they perceive me? So thinking about things like, okay, will I be embarrassed about this if a potential employer one day asks me about this? Or, if a friend of a friend sees it and says, oh, I saw what Amanda said about this thing. Like, do I feel like it's defensible ultimately? Um, and usually for me, when I think about if something is defensible, I think about, okay, and if I used any facts or sources, were they true? Like, were those accurate? Um, what was my sentiment in writing about it? Like, was it a rant? It probably wasn't, or maybe it was. Was it something that was super positive about something? And it doesn't have to be one or the other, but it's more of, would I be embarrassed about that? Like,
Yeah.
if I wrote some really terrible rant about something, I can't think of something right now, but if I did, would I regret it in a couple of weeks? Like, would I feel badly about it? I do think about that as I publish. And then ultimately, I think of what I've found is, when I think about something as defensible, it for me, it waters down potential emotion. So I think as I get clarity on what defensible is, like, then I'll start looking at sources, researching, um, understanding why something is the way it is. At the end of the day, when I come to understand that thing or that topic, I feel less emotional about it, and I feel like, oh, okay, I can kind of wrap my head around this, and then I can write about it with more clarity and think about it with more clarity. So yeah,
I love that too, because I think the evolution of a writer, you start as an emotional writer, because what else do you
yeah,
have to talk about? You have yourself
yeah.
and your ideas and your opinions to talk about, but there's, for me, an evolution, whereas I stopped writing about my story and I started writing about things that were true in the context of my experience, right? Because you can't
Mhm.
argue your experience, but
Yeah.
you also can't argue something where it's fundamentally accurate, and it just forces you to up your game as a writer, because as your audience grows as well, you think to yourself, am I gonna feel stupid if somebody reads something on here and like calls me out on it? Because like that has definitely happened to me before. And like
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about it. There's like something that is so painful about when you just get called out in public for some shit that you said that like you totally shouldn't have said, you know?
Right. You start to think, oh no, was that worth it? Should I have really said that?
uh
Oh.
Well, thank you so much for all of that insight. I
Yeah.
know that there's a ton of writers that are going to listen to this and start reading your work and see how much
Yeah.
of a pro you are. I do
That's
want to
nice.
finish off a little bit talking a bit more about Growth Machine, because uh, I'm just a fan of the company, and I'm a fan of, how do I explain this? I'm a fan of the way that you guys present a service industry in kind of like a new age, let's call it millennial-ish sort of tech front-facing brand. So
Mhm.
my question is more specifically about the company. What is the culture like there? I mean, is it really as fun to work there as it looks like it is?
It really is. I mean, I think what feels unique to me, or okay, here's what's unique to me about the company, and this is the company as a place to work, is there very much is this shared culture of content creation. Like everybody within the company has had some kind of content related side project.
Cool.
Like our COO Nora Schlesinger, she has her food blog called The Clean Bake. It has a huge following, and that was something that she started and she started this years ago because she wanted to, and it was something it was a project she wanted to build up, so she did. And there are other people at the company who do similar things. So I think having this kind of shared culture that is core to what we do, content creation, I think that makes a big impact on the culture itself, like as a place to work. I think that, inherently gives all of us an appreciation for content, like for good writing and good editing. Like I don't, I think in some companies or some agencies maybe, I think writing it's underappreciated very, generally, right? Like I think sometimes people think, oh, I can write because everyone can write, I can do it, or like, why is that taking so long? But at Growth Machine, we all inherently understand how difficult it is to write, so we have more respect for it. And yeah, I think there's just a lot of respect for everyone on the team and what their roles are. I think that also just comes from the fact that we are a pretty lean team. um, we don't have like 50 project managers or 50 marketing people or that kind of thing. um, everyone everyone has a pretty clear plate. Like everyone knows what's on their plate. Everybody knows what their role is and how they contribute. And so yeah.
So cool. It's really refreshing to hear that it's a group of content creators doing content creation. I
Yeah.
can see in my mind I don't want to say this bad about anybody. Like I'm not trying to talk shit, but there's obviously marketing agencies out there where you just fill in the role for the best kind of resume, as opposed to people that appreciate the art of it, doing it for people for money, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing when people get paid to do what they love to do and get paid to do what they're good at and get paid to do stuff that helps other people, right? It's like the perfect combination of life and work and happiness. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. It was really a pleasure talking to you. I will certainly keep up with your work and hopefully continue to learn from you and your writing. Before we sign off, where is it that people can find you?
You can hear me. Thank you so much for having me, Tim. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So before we sign off, where is it that people can find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Amanda Nat, or on the Growth Machine Twitter account at Growth Machine __. Yeah, and check out the Growth Machine blog, and our podcast is back too. So
Oh, no way. You guys relaunched it?
yeah, we did. Yeah, I think by the time this podcast hits, we will have had 1 or 2 episodes. So be sure to check us out, the Growth Machine podcast. Subscribe. We're going to be doing these weekly.
That's amazing. I will put all of that in the show notes of the website. Well, Amanda, one last time, thank you so much for joining me. We'll do this again. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah, this will be great. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Tim.
Cool. See ya.